Wonderful. That's a good sign. Hopefully that means everyone can. So welcome everybody to tonight's foster care session. Really excited to talk to you about all things foster care, and hopefully tonight you're going to learn some things and leave learning more, knowing more than when you arrived. That's what we always hope. So welcome along, and to get us started, I'd love to hear where everyone is from. So if you can pop into the chat box where you're actually from, which suburb you're zooming in from this evening, and your chat box, there's a couple of different places it might be for you. It might be at the top of your screen, the little chat box icon. Otherwise, you might have to click on the three dots and more options will come up and you might find the chat box there. So I can see some people are letting us know where they're from. Thank you. I can see we've got Jessie Lee from Bundoora, fantastic. Malak from Craigieburn, Craig from Cranbourne West, great. Deirdre from Frankston, and Denise from Paran, and Michelle from Albert Park. And Beth is in Mildura at the moment, but hoping to move back to Melbourne soon. Fantastic, Beth. We hope you do, because then we can process an application from you. So that's a huge spread of people right across Melbourne. And I'm sure all of you were very kindly shaken out of bed by the earthquake this morning. So I hope everyone fared okay with that. And I've got Sorella from East Doncaster as well. Fantastic. So a real spread right across the suburbs of Melbourne. Now that is a really positive thing if you're all thinking of becoming foster carers, because we need foster carers all over Melbourne. So it's fantastic that we've got a nice spread represented there. So what I'm going to start doing now is moving through a bit of a presentation this evening. The way that it's going to work is I'm going to tell you a little bit about foster care, work through a very brief presentation, and answer any questions that you have as well. So you're now familiar with how the chat box works, which is excellent, because that's how I'll get you to share your questions with us. Before I move into that though, I would just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging all around Australia and all around Melbourne. I'm in Ascot Vale and I'm on the land of the Wurundjeri people. So this is their country, always was and always will be. So let's have a look at some housekeeping. My name's Hannah, and you've already heard a little bit of my voice tonight. You're going to hear a lot more of it, so apologies in advance about that. My job as the Care Practice Manager for Life Without Barriers Victoria is that I sit across our team responsible for managing inquiries and training and assessments of people who want to be foster carers. So I'm very blessed to do a job that I absolutely love. And a big part of why I love my job is because I get to speak to find people like you who are thinking about doing a wonderful thing and becoming foster carers. And I have my wonderful sidekick, Louise, with me here tonight. Lou, can I get you to introduce yourself there?
Oh, hi guys, welcome to our information session. Yes, I'm Lou, the Care Engagement Officer. So if you do want to proceed after tonight's info, click on the link and I'll be the person that can walk you through the process or answer any more questions that you may have.
Lovely, thanks Lou. And Lou is a real wizard and genius at answering questions. So you're in very good hands if you do decide to proceed with an inquiry after this evening. So tonight, what it's all about tonight is you leaving with more information that you had than you arrived. So we really want to answer any questions that you might have about foster care, about the process, anything at all. So if you have questions throughout the presentation I'm about to give, please don't hold on to them. Feel free to just pop them in the chat box so that we can come to them at the end. And I promise we will get to all of them. Of course, we want to respect your confidentiality though. So if you have any really specific or personal questions, you might choose to leave those until we're speaking with you privately. And at the very end of this evening, I'll give you some options about how we can continue the conversation privately as well. So that's a little bit about how tonight's going to run. It's not a really long night, but it's really full of info. So let's get started together. And please do keep in mind, pop those questions in the chat box as they come up. So a bit of an overview about what we're going to talk through tonight. There's a couple of things that we'll move through. I promise none of them takes too long. First and foremost, I'll tell you a little bit about Life Without Barriers, the organisation for which Lou and I work. We'll talk about what foster care is, because that's really important for you to know if you want to be a foster carer. We'll talk about where lots of foster carers are needed, and a quick hint, it's everywhere. We'll also talk about the different types of foster care. We'll talk about children in care and some of the stories that we hear in care as well. We'll talk about who can be a carer, and hopefully by the end of this session, you'll have realised you can. And we'll then work through some of the most frequently asked questions that Louise and I hear all the time in our jobs. And trust us, we've heard it all before. There's no such thing as a silly question in this space. And then, of course, once we've answered those FAQs, we'll come to your questions at the end as well. So feel free to pop them in the chat box as we go. And at the very end, as I mentioned, I'll give you some options about how you can continue the conversation and learn a bit more and talk about your situation specifically, and perhaps even move forward with an inquiry. So that is what we're going to do tonight. So let's get started. So firstly, let's talk about who Life Without Barriers is. So we're a leading social purpose organisation, and we work all across Australia in hundreds of different communities and in a number of different spaces as well. So we work with people with disability, we work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, we work with refugees and asylum seekers, we work in aged care as well. And as you can see, excuse me, here on the left, we work with children and young people. And among that, we work with thousands of foster and kinship carers across Australia. So that's a little bit about us and the work that we do. So what is foster care? It's really important for you to understand that. And really what foster care is a safe and supportive home that is provided to children who can't live with their biological families right now, so they can heal and grow. Foster care might be needed for a night or a week or a year, or maybe for several years. But at the heart of it, it's important to understand that foster care is temporary care. And in Victoria, we're always trying to reunify families and put families back together where that is safe and appropriate. So that's what we try and do in all cases. At any given time around Australia, there are around 50,000 children who aren't able to live safely at home with their parents right now. So we're always on the lookout for quality foster carers. So where are we looking for these quality foster carers? The answer is everywhere. And as you can see from our little map of Oz here, there's absolutely foster carers needed all across Australia. If we zoom down to our little state of Victoria down the bottom here, you can see that at any given time, there's about 1,500 children in foster care and just under 7,000 children in kinship or relative care. And what I mean by that is maybe they can't live with mum and dad right now, but they're living with grandma or an uncle or a cousin or something like that. So that's the difference between foster and kinship care. And as I mentioned before, Victoria has a real emphasis on trying to put families back together. So you'll notice that our numbers of children in foster care are quite a bit lower than those in kinship care compared to other states. And that's a really good thing. So let's talk about some of the different types of foster care. There are different types, and different types suit different lifestyles. So firstly, one of the types of care is respite care, which is usually planned in advance, and it might be for a weekend or for a week during the school holidays, for example. It's basically anything up to 7 nights at a time, respite care. And respite care exists to provide full-time foster carers with a bit of a break. So for example, they might have a child in placement with them long-term, but they're going to a wedding this weekend, if they're allowed, because there's no lockdown, and they can't take the child with them. So they can be safe knowing that the child's going to go off to some respite carers for the weekend. The great thing about respite care for children is that it gives kids the opportunity to mix in different social networks, to try different food, and to stay in a different home, which is really exciting for them. And ultimately, it teaches them that there are lots of adults who really care about them. So that's the positive of respite care. Over on the right here, emergency care. It is not planned in advance. It is where children need somewhere to stay right now. They need to be taken somewhere safe. The call for an emergency care placement might happen at 3 in the morning or 3 in the afternoon, or literally any hour in between those as well. So emergency carers do need to have a pretty high level of flexibility. Emergency care is anything for up to 4 weeks at a time. So it might be for one night, it might be for up to 4 weeks. That's sort of the time frame we're talking. Then down the bottom here, we've got short-term care. And short-term care is anything up to 6 months at a time, basically. And it is typically used when there's a difficult situation being worked out at home. Maybe mum and dad have a particular issue that they need some support with right now that might take 6 months or less. Or perhaps it might be used when there's some plans for long-term care still to be made. Like all of our care types, it needs to feel safe and stable for children to heal and build relationships with family while they're in placement. And then lucky last, we have long-term care over on the right here. And long-term care is basically anything 6 months and above. We are looking, from long-term carers, we're looking for a commitment to supporting children towards adulthood, so towards the age of 18. And there's a real focus in long-term care on creating a sense of stability for the child and making them and letting them know that they're safe and that they're stable. Long-term care doesn't mean forever, though, in all cases. So it's really important to know that there are no guarantees in foster care. Some children in long-term care will never reunify to family, but some might. So there's really no guarantees in that space. So that's a little bit about the different types of care, and you can see that they do vary tremendously from one to the other. But at the end of the day, no two children or families are the same, and therefore no two placements are the same. And that's why we need a variety of different carers to care for a variety of different children and their circumstances. So let's talk now about the Life Without Barriers approach to foster care. So everything that we do here at Life Without Barriers and the decisions that we make and the work that we're doing every day with children and young people and foster carers is grounded by an evidence-informed and therapeutic model of care that's really easy to remember the name of. Its name is CARE. So that's really simple for me. And I'll give you a brief nutshell explanation of what that looks like. So it has 6 principles, and they are these. The first one is that it's relationship based. And what that means is that we recognize children need trusting and meaningful relationships with the adults who are caring for them. And what that does is help children learn how to make those trusting and meaningful relationships with other people as well, and learn that they're cared for. It's developmentally focused, or in other words, focused on strategies for change that meet the child where they're at. We want to challenge children enough so that they are always learning and growing, but we don't want to overwhelm them with a sense of failure if they're never getting it right. So we really need to make sure we're hitting the mark and being developmentally focused. It's also trauma informed. And what that means is that we always have to be mindful of the impact that children's trauma has had on them developmentally. And as the adult in the situation, we have to modify our expectations and our behaviour accordingly. So we have to take the high road sometimes, in other words. It's family involved, and what that means is we recognise that a child's identity and their very sense of who they are and how they belong in the world is inextricably tied to their family, their community and their culture. So we have to work really hard to make sure they stay connected to all of those things while they're in foster care. It's competency centred, or in other words, it's skills based. So we're really focused on helping children to develop skills that they need now as a child, but also things that will serve them well, you know, for the rest of their lives. And excuse me, last but not least, it's ecologically oriented, which is a fancy way of saying we recognise that the environment that a child grows up in and the role models who surround that child have a really big influence on how that child learns to care for themselves and care for others. So that is a very, very brief explanation of care, which again is the underpinning framework for all of the work that we do here at Life Without Barriers. So let's talk about the children in care. This is the part everyone wants to know about. So before I move into the slide here, I'll just point out the lovely Kieran on the left-hand side here and his very handsome dog. So Kieran came into foster care when he was 12. He's now obviously grown up, as you can see. He has a full-time job. He's excited about buying a house in the future. And he says that his foster carer played a really big part in who he is today. So that's the kind of impact that you can have as a foster carer. I think that's really important to be grounded in as we're talking about foster care tonight. So over to our slide now, you can see that there are many reasons that children come into care. Really no two stories are the same, everyone is different, but What we do see is very common across children in care is that they come from complex family and social situations where they have very likely suffered neglect, trauma, and abuse. So children in care might be anywhere from 0 to 18 years of age. They come from any different cultural background. They all have families that are important to them. That's a really significant thing to remember. And they've all endured trauma of some sort. So just being removed from your family of origin is traumatic. It causes trauma. Some children might have been physically, emotionally, or sexually abused, and others might have seen horrible things happen to the people that they love, like domestic violence. And others still might have been neglected. So what I mean when I say that is that they haven't been given the appropriate level of care, support, and supervision that they need to develop and grow as we would expect for a child of their age. So that's what I mean by neglect. So that's a little bit about where these children are coming from and some of the things that they've been through. So with all that in mind, now I'm sure you can appreciate that we really need carers with attributes and beliefs that we know are good for children so that we can help those children to start to heal and grow. So let's talk a little bit about some of our wonderful carers or the things that are helpful for children in care. Here we can see the lovely Gary and Shell on the left-hand side, and they are a Tasmanian couple. They're some of our carers from Tassie. Now, they have a farm and they provide long-term care for 6 to 11-year-olds. And what you can see there is that they have 5 children currently in their care, which is mind-blowing, and they must have lots of space. But the really positive thing about that is that they have 5 siblings living with them, all being able to continue living under the same roof. And that's a wonderful opportunity that's been given to those kids. So that's a little bit about Gary and Shell and what makes them special. In the middle here is Stacey. Now, Stacey isn't a carer herself, but she did grow up in foster care and she's now studying at uni to be a social worker. So she talks about how important it was to her that her foster care family made her feel welcoming and included and part of their family, which is really lovely. And then on the right here, we've got the lovely Belinda, and she provides different care types for 5 to 18-year-olds. Now, Belinda's a single carer who works full-time in a really demanding role, but that hasn't stopped her being a carer. She started out doing things like weekend respite and emergency care, and then she's moved into providing short-term care as well. And you'll notice underneath all of those stories, there's a little read more tab. And that's because all of these stories are from our Life Without Barriers website. These stories and dozens more where you can learn a little bit about some of the carers that we have at Life Without Barriers and some of the children that we've supported through to adulthood who've grown up in foster care. So I really recommend that you go and read the stories. There's some beautiful ones there. So let's talk about who can be a carer. Hopefully you're becoming a little bit curious about that now because you're starting to understand a little bit more about foster care. It's likely that you can be a carer. Carers can be married, single, living together, divorced, from all backgrounds and cultures. Really what we're interested in is, can you care for and nurture a child? That's the stuff that's really important to us. So there's a few eligibility criteria that you need to meet. You need to be over 21 years of age and you need to have relevant life experience. And what we mean by that is that you need to have met a child. You need to understand the basics of what children need to learn and grow. You need to be well and healthy because it can be quite a demanding role being a foster carer. So we need to know that you're going to be okay. You need to have a regular source of income or be financially stable. You might be from any cultural background, you might be single or in a relationship, that's all totally fine. You do need to be willing to undergo background checks, things like police checks and working with children checks. Those are some really easy ways that we can start to make sure that you're a safe and suitable person to be caring for children. And then for your home and your family, you might have your own children or not. That's totally fine. You might rent a home or own one. That's also totally fine. You do need to have a spare room available, and that's where the child is going to live. You do need to have a car and a license so that you can transport the child from place to place. And everyone that lives with you needs to be willing to participate in the assessment process to some degree. And I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. So that's a bit about who can be a carer. We're going to move now into some frequently asked questions, and these are the things that Lou and I hear all the time in our jobs from people. So some questions about you. People ask this all the time still. I'm single, can I be a foster carer? And the answer is absolutely you can. In fact, about half of our foster carers are single because families need to come in all shapes and sizes. So really that's what we focus on. Same thing for this question. We're a same-sex couple. Can we be foster carers? Absolutely, you can. It matters not to us if you're in a same-sex attracted relationship or a heterosexual one, or if you're single or whatnot. That's all totally fine. Again, what we really are interested in is that you're able to provide a stable and loving home for children and young people. Can I foster even though I'm not a parent myself? Yes, you can. So we conduct a really thorough assessment process and we look for the skills that you already have when it comes to children, and we look for the skills that you might still need to develop. And from that assessment process, we then make recommendations about what type of care, what age group, what needs level of children would suit you and your household. So that's how we sort of work through the process with you. There's a little checklist I love here on the right, and it is a checklist of things that great foster carers have. So it's things like patience and understanding, acceptance is a huge one, commitment and resilience, I would add, flexibility, time to give, and a commitment to helping children maintain and strengthen their family relationships while they're in your care. Nowhere on that list is there anything about sexuality or marital status. It really just isn't that important. These are the things that really matter when it comes to foster care. So let's talk a little bit about your home. Do I need to have a spare room? Yes, you do. It is a very simple answer to that question. The reason that you need to have a spare room is because it helps a child in your home feel safe and secure and like they belong and have a place there. That's why it's so vitally important for them. Do I need to own my own home to be a foster carer? No, it's almost laughable now with the way that the housing market's going in Melbourne. We'd run out of foster carers really quickly if that was a requirement. So absolutely no worries if you're renting in public housing. Maybe you have a mortgage, maybe you do own your house outright. Congrats if you do. You might have an apartment, you might have a house. Totally fine, no worries at all. All we need to be able to satisfy is that you have safe and suitable premises to provide foster care. That's obviously what we're interested in. And if you do rent or you're in public housing, you might need to talk to your landlord about the fact that you might have children coming to live with you and make sure that that's okay with them. So a little bit about your family. Can I be a parent and then also be a foster carer? Absolutely, you can. So your family situation is something we look really closely at through our assessment process with you to make sure that we're recommending appropriate ages and needs levels of children that we might place with you. The general sort of rule that we use at Life Without Barriers is that we would like to place children with you who are younger than your youngest child. So if your youngest child is 7 years of age, we wouldn't be showing up to your house with 16-year-old triplets and thinking that was a really good idea. We would want to go younger than your youngest child. What we do hope is that your children are going to be old enough to tell you if things aren't working out for them, if placements aren't going well. If you have really young children where they're not able to do that yet, you might consider putting off your application for a few years until they're a bit older. So we sort of want children to be about that sort of 5-6 years of age before we will process an application. Will all my family be involved in the assessment process? Yes, they will to some degree. It's really important that they are. So the assessment process is made up of lots of different things. Some of it is a bit formal. So for example, the police checks and the working with children checks that I was talking about before, that applies to everyone in the household who's an adult. We also do medical and referee checks. And then we also do the more informal side of the assessment, which is where we just sit down and have a good old chat with everybody, lots of discussions and interviews. If you have children living with you, for example, our assessor might ask them how they feel about another child coming to live with you, how they feel about sharing their toys, how they feel about sharing mum and dad's time with another child. And we'll also check in about things like what routines and consequences and discipline exist in your home. Obviously, we're not going to ask them in words like that. If they're quite a young child, we might get them to draw pictures to have the conversation. We might get them to build a Lego house, whatever will kind of work for the child. Basically, the reason that we need to do that is because we have a responsibility to ensure that everyone who lives in your household is prepared for the significant changes that foster care will bring. So we need to make sure everyone's on board. So some questions about the child in care. How are children matched to foster carers? As I've mentioned a couple of times now, we're going to complete a very thorough assessment of anyone who wants to be a foster carer and their household and all of the things about them. So we'll have all of that information about you. Then when we receive information about a child who needs a placement, we read all of the information we have about the child. We look at all of the information we have about you and your family and all of the other available foster families we have. And then we decide from that, what's the most compatible match? What has the highest chance of success here? And that's how placements are made. Can I choose the age and gender of the child? Your views and wishes are always taken into consideration, and that's a big part of the assessment process as well, is talking about things like age and sometimes gender. Some people come to us and they don't really have any preferences about that. Other people come to us and they might have very specific preferences about that, and that's generally because of their own life or parenting experiences. I guess the point that I would make there is we do need to see a degree of flexibility from you. So if you're coming to us and saying, I can only care for children aged between 2 and 3, and they have to be a boy and they have to have blonde hair and blue eyes, that makes it really hard for us to place with you very regularly. So it might not be in our best interest to assess you and accredit you, because we're not going to be able to place with you at the end of it. So we just ask for a bit of flexibility while also taking into consideration your views and wishes. Some more questions about the child in care. This one can sometimes surprise or maybe shock people. Do children in foster care have ongoing relationships with their biological family? And the answer is yes. Where it's safe and appropriate, we always want children to remain connected to their family, because they love their family and their family loves them. So it's really important that we keep those links alive. And so for that reason, it's really important that foster carers are able to support that and actively play a positive role in helping children remain connected to their family members. And what happens if the placement doesn't work out? Again, something people are often worried about at the start of the process. Obviously, what we don't want is for children to come into foster care and be moved from place to place and family to family time and time again. That's really not what we hope for children in care, and it's not in their best interest. If that does happen, what children start to do is think that it's their fault and that there's something wrong with them, and that's why these placements keep not working out. So you'll have a lot of support around you as a carer to try and make placements work. And we do all of that really good matching at the start as well. But at the end of the day, if a placement is just going disastrously badly for you, all we hope we can do is just work with you to find the best solution for you and for your family, and ultimately for the child as well. And often what we need there is time, so that we can build toward a good solution for everybody. And then some questions about the process. So how long does this thorough assessment process I keep talking about, how long does that take? So if you're thinking about fostering, you'll have lots of questions, and I can assure you we'll have lots of questions for you as well. And it's important that everybody gets the answers to those questions throughout the process. So if after this evening you think, yep, this is a really good idea, I'm going to start the process now, in about 4 months' time, you might find yourself accredited and caring for children if everything goes well, if there's no bumps along the way. So that's about how long the process takes. And what are the stages of the process? I'll just give you a quick overview of those now. So there's an initial inquiry, which you might decide to make after tonight. And that involves a conversation to really make sure that you meet all of those criteria, etc. Then you move from there to a home visit, which obviously in Victoria at the moment we're doing via Zoom. There is some paperwork that we ask you to complete, plenty of paperwork, everyone's favourite part. And then we can book you into what's called shared lives training, which is about 16 hours of really great training, which basically tells people what to expect in terms of becoming a carer. So I absolutely love the training, and you do that with our team. So by the end of your training process, you've normally met our whole foster care team. So all of the people who will end up working with you or maybe assessing you, you tend to have met them all through that process. If after the training you're still excited to proceed, then you'll move through to assessment, which is that process I've talked a little bit about throughout this evening. Once we've assessed you, we write up all of the information that we've gathered into a nice long report, which you read. And then we take that report along to what's called an approval panel, which is where Life Without Barriers sits down with Child Protection, and together we talk about what a wonderful carer you're going to be. And that's where we give the big green tick of approval and you become an accredited carer. That's where the magic happens. So that's what the process looks like in a nutshell. And if you go through that process and become a carer, what support should you expect to receive? So really important that you know that you're never alone in your caring journey. It can be a really challenging role to be a foster carer. So it's really important that carers feel supported and confident, because when they do, they provide better quality care to the children that they're looking after. So that's what we focus on. This is what the support looks like that you can expect to receive. So you receive ongoing training so you can continue to sharpen your knowledge and skills. Whether you have had one placement or 50 placements, you always can learn something more. There's specialist support available to you, things like clinicians to really help you out where you're struggling maybe with some behaviours of the child, for example. There's also 24/7 on-call support. So at any time of the day or night, if something's not going well for you and you need some advice or support, there will be someone at the end of the phone who can talk you through it. You're also entitled to respite care. If you're providing short or long-term care for a child, you're entitled to some respite care so you can have some weekends off. There is some financial support that comes along with being a foster carer, but it is quite minimal. It's certainly not a get-rich-quick scheme. You're not going to make squillions of dollars being a foster carer, so sorry if that was your plan. Basically, the financial support you receive is a small allowance to contribute toward just the everyday costs of raising a child. And then there's also care and networking events as well. So it's really important that you're able to develop some supportive peer relationships with other carers, because they might be the best people to support you through being a foster carer. So that's a bit about the support that you can expect to receive. So I think we've reached that magical portion of the evening where it's time to throw it to you guys, our attendees, and answer any questions that you might have out of all of the information we've just talked through there. So please feel free to tap in any questions that you have into the chat box. And I'm just going to check in with Louise and see if we've had any come through. Oh, I think you're on mute there, Lou. I can't hear you, but I can see that you are talking. There we go.
Oh, hi guys. No questions as of yet. So type in your questions. It's your chance to ask away. Beautiful. Oh, I have one now. If the child in care is in contact with biological family, could they give out details of where they are?
Oh, really good question. So I guess that's always a risk to be considered. It would depend on the age of the child and how they might be in contact with biological family members. For example, if they're older and they might have their own phone. So that's something that we would always plan around, because our foster carers' safety is really important for us to be mindful of. But I don't think it happens frequently. I've heard of a couple of experiences of that happening. However, I wouldn't say that it's terribly common, and it's something we can do some safety planning around. Any other questions in the box there, Lou?
No. Would anyone like to ask any questions?
What normally happens at about this time is, as soon as I try and move on to the next slide, that's when everyone starts typing in their questions. Gets me every time. So I'm trying to hover.
Okay, I have a few here now.
Lovely.
How many hours is involved in the training, and what sort of topics do you cover?
Oh, great question. So the training goes for 16 hours in total. So there's 8 modules and we cover all sorts of different topics. So it happens on Zoom at the moment, the training, normally on evenings and some Saturday mornings. And the types of things that we talk about in the training are, again, we recap the different care types. We talk about how children come into care, so really detailed information about that. Give you an overview of how the care team works, what your expectations are as a carer in terms of what you need to be doing. And really, we talk through strategies and trauma-informed ways of responding to children. That's what most of the training is about. So a lot of information about developmental trauma and how it impacts children, and advice about the best way to respond to them. Trying to be very nutshell, because I'm very passionate about the training and I could talk all night about it, but I think that sort of sums it up. Do you think, Lou, that about covers it?
Absolutely, yeah. I have a few more to ask. Can I sleep on the couch while the child sleeps in my room?
Okay, that's a really good question, and one that we do sometimes get. Unfortunately, if that's the way that you're setting up the child to come into your home, they'll be sleeping in your bed in your room. So they don't really have a space where they belong in the home. And that's why it's really important that they have their own room. So sleeping arrangements is something that can be difficult because obviously we're working in Metro Melbourne and not every house has lots of spare rooms. So if you don't have a spare room right now, it might be that now's not the time to make an application with us. But if you have any further questions about your living situation, please feel free to reach out to us and I'll give you some ways you can do that at the end of tonight and we can talk more about it.
Okay, can a foster carer be a carer in a few of the areas?
Oh, as in a few of the different care types, I think is what they mean. Do you think that's...
Yeah, maybe.
If that is what you're asking, can I be a foster carer and provide different care types all at once? Absolutely, you can. You can be a foster carer and accredited for respite, emergency, short-term and long-term care. And just the right placement at the right time will obviously be offered to you. So absolutely, you don't have to just pick one. In fact, it's better if you have a couple of options up your sleeve.
Excellent. Are foster children able to participate in religious activities the carer family is involved in?
Yeah, so it really depends on the child and on the family. So if a child comes into your care and they come along with their own religious beliefs, it might be that they're not able to join you at your religion's practices or ceremonies because maybe they have their own religions, practices or ceremonies that they need to be tending to. However, in saying that, that's just in some cases. In other cases, it might be entirely appropriate and okay for a child to come along with you to your church or to your religious place of worship. It's a very case-by-case basis, so it's hard for me to give one answer, but hopefully that gives you a bit of an indication that it can be possible. It's just discussed with the child's care team, and that's how the decision is arrived at.
Excellent. How do we start the process, Hannah?
Oh, what a lovely question. And I'm going to give you the exact answer to that on the very next slide. So there's a number of different ways that you can start the process and make an inquiry with us so that we can continue the conversation. So please bear with me and I'll get to that on the very next slide and give you those options. I'll just make sure I answer all the questions we have in the chat box first. Are there any others there, Lou? Oh, just on mute there, Lou.
I think this is one that you answered before. I have one spare bedroom. Can I sleep on the couch and give up the bedroom to the child? We've already covered that one.
Yeah, it wouldn't be what we would recommend.
Can I begin the process now or should I wait until I live in Melbourne to begin?
Oh, that's a great question. You could certainly start the process of inquiry now, and what we might wait until you've moved to Melbourne, that's when we might do your training and assessment. So we absolutely wouldn't assess you until you've moved to Melbourne, but we can get some of the process started while you're still in the planning stage.
Absolutely. Okay, are you linked to Lookout?
Are we linked to Lookout, which I think is the name of the sub-program that sits in the Department of Education that works with schools to make sure that they are implementing really trauma-informed and appropriate education plans for children in care. So if that's the same Lookout that you're talking about, then yes, we are linked with Lookout for some of our children that we do have placed with us. So absolutely, we love community agencies and services that can help us to help kids.
We certainly do. Can foster care lead to possibility of adoption?
Great question. In the state of Victoria, no, it can't, because adoption is sort of a magical faraway thing that sits over there in Victoria. It's quite complicated in this state. In rare cases, if you become a long-term carer, you might end up becoming the permanent carer of the child, but it's really important that you understand that that's not what we're signing you up for. You shouldn't be coming along to be a foster carer with that as your overarching expectation. There are no guarantees in foster care, and it is temporary care at the heart of things. So children might go back to family at any given time. So it's important that you're not coming in with those expectations of the child being your child. Instead, you're going to care for them for the time that you have them and help them to build relationships with and stay connected to their biological family. So I hope that gives you enough of an answer to your question.
Someone said that they've arrived late to the session this evening. Is it recorded?
It absolutely is. The good news is you haven't missed anything. You will have the session emailed out to you after we've finished tonight. Normally our lovely marketing officer, Sharon, gets that out to everybody tomorrow. So everybody will get a copy of that.
Excellent. Can you start with short-term care and then move along to long-term care?
Absolutely, you can. So really, care types are something we really explore with you in assessment. Some people just come in and say, accredit me for everything, and that might be what they do. Other people sort of want to dip a bit of a toe in and start with short-term care and build to long-term, and that's okay as well. We will discuss that with you through the assessment, and everyone's different in what they'd prefer to do. So that's absolutely fine.
If a child comes into your care and they go back to their family, but they find themselves in foster care again, will they be placed back with the same foster carer?
Oh, that's a great question. And that's what it's all about, consistency for the child. So if they have gone back to family, but things maybe haven't turned out the way we'd hoped, and now they're coming back into foster care, we will absolutely make every effort to place them back with carers that they're already familiar with and who know how to care for them. So that's something we always hope that we're able to do.
Are foster children able to attend extended family events of the carer family, as in birthdays, holidays, Sunday family lunches, etc.?
Yeah, a lovely question. And that really shows that you're thinking about how can I include the child in mine and my family's life? And that's what we hope for kids in care. We want them to be part of the family. We want them to have the opportunity of experiencing happy times like birthdays and holidays, etc. So absolutely, we always would like those things to happen. Of course, because some of the children we have in care have been through developmental trauma, they might struggle in some of those social situations. So it's always just about being mindful of the child's experience and making really good decisions for them. But absolutely, that's not off the table at all. We would hope that we could get the child in and included in your family events.
And that's it, Hannah. Great question.
Beautiful. Yes.
Oh, one more.
Oh, one more. Yeah.
If a school-aged child comes into your home, are you, as the foster carer, responsible for engaging them into the local school?
Oh, great question. And look, no, that you are not alone as a foster carer, and we don't just sort of drop the child off and wave from a distance and drive away and leave you with it. We help you, and there's a care team wrapped around the child. So they'll probably already have a school or a childcare that they're engaged with, and we will work with you to enroll them and all of that sort of stuff. So you're never sort of left with that responsibility on your own, but great question.
Okay, and I have another one, Hannah. With short-term care, can you set how long you're available for example, something specific like 1 month?
Yeah, that is absolutely a possibility, because not everyone can commit to a full 6 months at a time. So all we hope for is flexibility from people in their availability, because it's not in our best interest to have lots of carers on our books but no one available any of the time. But absolutely, if there's particular reasons you can't commit to a full 6 months, for example, and you might have one available month, that's something we can absolutely talk with you about and work with.
Okay. And there was one question from the lady that arrived late asking how long the process takes.
Ah, wonderful. So it takes about, in a nutshell, about 4 months, but there's a really detailed answer to that question that you'll see when we send the recording out to you tomorrow.
Excellent. Oh, hang on, 2 more.
It's raining questions.
No, everyone's just thanking you for the answers, Hannah. So.
Oh, lovely. Well, thank you. That's really lovely. And hopefully everyone is feeling like they're sort of, no questions are off limits as well. And that's just, tonight is a very brief info session, very basic, but there's lots more opportunities for you to keep the conversation going and to learn more. And let me show you how on this very next slide. So if you want to continue the conversation that we've started tonight, this really is just the beginning. We've scratched the surface. You can find out more, firstly, at our Life Without Barriers foster care website. Absolutely recommend that you check this out. It has lots of beautiful stories of some of our carers and the children we've supported who've grown up in care. It's an ideal place to find out more. The next option you might like to do is to take a minute after this session and fill in what we call our Call Me Back form. It takes about 30 seconds to fill in, and you submit it and it goes off into the cloud, and one of our team members will call you in the next couple of days after you've submitted that form. And Lou is going to paste the link for the Call Me Back form into the chat box for you now. Is that in there, Lou? Wonderful, legend. Thank you. So the link for that Call Me Back form is in the chat box if you'd like to click on it and keep it there for later. If you, like me, are an impatient person and don't want to fill in a Call Me Back form and you want to call us instead, we absolutely welcome that. That's no worries at all. Our contact details are here on this slide, but they're also really easy to see on our website as well. So you can pop along there and have a bit of a look. So that's just some of the ways that you might like to continue the conversation with us here at Life Without Barriers about your foster care application and whether this is the right time for you and your family to be applying. We really do hope that you've learned enough tonight that you can make that decision for yourself about whether you'd like to proceed further. And of course, there's plenty more opportunities to ask questions and get more information along the way. So that's really the end of it for us this evening. I really want to thank you. They were probably the best questions I think we've had in a session. And I promise I don't just say that in every session. They were genuinely really, really good. And it shows me that this group is really thinking logistically about some of the things that might come up in foster care, which is a great sign. So to finish this evening, I always like to finish with a bit of a grounding reminder of why it is that we need foster carers. And that's by looking at the story of Stacey, who you can see here on your screen. And she says, without my carer, I wouldn't be where I am today. So she came into care when she was 4, and now she's come out the other side, a grown woman at university and studying to be a social worker. And that's the difference that you can make in the life of a child and young person when you become a foster carer. So I hope some of you will consider taking the plunge with us and looking at continuing the process. But for now, I would like to wish you all good night and hope for no further earthquakes at any stage this week. And maybe the protests can finish too and life can settle down and we can all get on with things. And hopefully some of you, that involves becoming a foster carer. So thank you all very much. Goodbye from me.
Thank you. Good night all.
And take care. Thanks, everybody.